right, welcome back to Roadmap to Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Alex Neary.
Welcome to Roadmap to Retirement. Tune in for financial tips, investment strategies, and smart money moves to supercharge your retirement savings. Alex Neary, CFP, and guests are here to help you build your roadmap to retirement.
Today I'm joined by Tyrone. Tyrone, who are you?
I'm Tyrone. I'm a credit financial counselor. I'm also a certified financial therapist level 1. And I just specialize in personal finance. I try to help people specifically budgeting or spending plans and create strategies to get out of debt management. And that's really what I focus on. I tend to work with mainly couples. I do work with individuals, but just so happens that a lot of my clients tend to be couples and helping them with their money.
Okay, very cool. So we talked with Nate a few weeks ago, who's a financial therapist. And then there's myself as a financial advisor. And you, I want you to put it in your own words. You fall somewhere between those two things. How would you say you differentiate from people like me and people like Nate?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Nate tends to focus more on the emotional side. He's a financial therapist and a great person. I want to add that he's a great person, great guy. I work with him quite a bit. And he's a financial therapist. So he tends to work with people more on the emotional side of money. And that's been a new area. We tend to look at finance and emotions when it mainly came to marketing. Like we try to figure out how emotions and feelings work with that side. But now for the last, I would say about 10 years, about almost 10 years, we started focusing more on financial therapy, which is the feelings around money. So he might have questions, or financial therapists may have questions about your childhood and how you grew up around money and how does money make you feel? How does debt make you feel? So they'll focus more on that area where it's the emotions around money. Then where I come in, and I'm a little different, but most people in my position as a financial counselor, or some people call themselves a financial coach, is they'll focus more on the budgeting, the spending plans, the debt management. They'll focus more specifically in that area. Where I differ a little bit, since I do have some experience with financial techniques, I can help understand, like say if they work with a therapist, me specifically, or a financial therapist, I can understand what the work they have done around money and like weave that into budgeting, because those things still pop up when you work with couples. Those maybe arguments or emotions or feelings will come into play, and I can use maybe some techniques to help them focus back on the task. But typically it's usually that middle ground. And then financial planners or financial advisors usually focus more on investments or retirement planning. They focus more on that area, where I don't focus more on investments. I give some information about investments, but I don't focus on investments. And financial planners mainly do that type of. Now, can the financial planners help budget? Absolutely. But most of them focus more on the financial, the planning or investments, the retirement, kind of big picture things. And you tend to be more in that middle ground.
Okay, yeah, I think there's definitely some overlap between what you and I do, and you probably have a lot of overlap between yourself and Nate. And I think the big theme talking to you and talking to Nate is trying to keep the kind of the emotional well-being in focus within your financial life. I think too many people are guilty of just, they focus on, we call it the spreadsheet financial planning. It's what does this rate of return get me? What do these numbers get me? What day can I retire? What does my retirement look like? How many dollars can I spend? And there's this whole other section of financial planning that's probably equally as important, if not more, you might be able to argue. And that's, where do the emotions come in? What are your past experiences? How does it affect how you actually behave around money, the behavioral financial aspect? So it's cool that you've carved out a niche in between those two worlds.
Yeah, it's really fun. And sometimes it's a space that's like missed at times. Even, there is definitely overlap, but sometimes I have clients where they'll say, hey, I tried to talk to a certified financial planner, but I don't have enough money to work with them. So sometimes that'll be they need some help just before they're able to get that next level help on their investments. But yeah, especially the emotion side, where that part, it's very important. That's why I try to focus on it, because what I've noticed in a lot of my work, we focus so much on the numbers that we focus more on the numbers, and a lot of times we can't get over the hump when we're trying to help people, when we're just focused on numbers. We have to also help them with the emotional side. That tends to be a lot of times more important. Talk about that side before we get to numbers, because what I noticed when I first started and I was just talking numbers, I would lose people. Matter of fact, the common thing I would get after I just talk about numbers, they'd be like, "That's it." They'd be like, "That's it." And I felt like I wasn't getting to them. I was like, "What am I doing wrong here?" And when I realized I wasn't really connecting with them, understanding what was going on emotionally, I would lose people because of that.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And the same is true on our end of things as well. Is you got to make the numbers mean more than just numbers on paper. So you mentioned you work with mostly couples, it sounds. And I talked to Nate about this also. And I think I cited a statistic that he disagreed with or told me I was wrong about. And that's that financial struggles are like one of the number one causes of divorce. And Nate would argue that's not what is actually causing the divorce. That's just how it's manifesting. Maybe is that the rise to the surface. They have that conversation that sort of ends a relationship. So, what are some strategies that you use in just making people have the conversation? Because I think it's generally uncomfortable to talk about finances. You're taught from a young age that it's taboo. You shouldn't dive into that. You don't ask those questions. But if you're married to a person, you got to get on the same page with it. So how do you start that conversation?
Okay. So a big thing is I tell couples that I work with is stop waiting until you're upset about something to start talking about money. I think that's the biggest thing. I think a lot of us wait or things will bother us and we'll just hold it and hold it. You try. Some people consider themselves being the bigger person, letting things go, but then they're building, right? You're just building. And the next thing you have an outburst and then now it's an argument. And then a lot of your times you're having conversations now and there are arguments about money because we're waiting. Set times to talk about money and have a good time. Maybe it's like once every month you set a good time. I joke around and say, hey, get some wine, get some cheese, some crackers, play some music, and then talk about finance. But another good thing that you'd be surprised, I'm always surprised, me personally, because we don't do these things, and that this is for everybody. Try to talk with your spouse, whoever it is. If you're getting to that level, talk to each other about your dreams and aspirations and goals. That's missed very often. Everybody gets caught up in their day-to-day. And when they get caught up in their day-to-day, they're forgetting to have the conversation about their dreams together. And you'll focus on all the expenses, all the problems, all the issues. That'll be pushed to the front. And then you won't have a common goal to get through those tough times or to make those tough decisions or maybe even sacrifices. Though we got to come together and try to have those common goals together, whether that's trips or getting a house or getting another car or whatever your dreams are together. You got to set those because it's hard to get through the budgeting and the sacrifice or maybe focus on little areas when you don't have that.
Yeah, I think that's a way to change a script, right? Rather than saying we need to sit down and have a time to talk about money, it's let's sit down and talk about planning to buy that house we want or take that vacation. And it still ends up being the same conversation, right? If you want to buy a house, it's a conversation about money, but it's way more approachable if you make it about something that you both want together. So I think that's great advice. And then even just scheduling a time in general, I think this is a hidden benefit that our clients get from meeting with us twice a year is they know they have their review meeting with their advisor twice a year. Hopefully they're preparing for that, but it forces them as a couple to at least acknowledge their finances twice a year, whether it's a conversation they have between the two of themselves before they come in to see me, or it's just that after they meet with me now, something's on the surface, they're talking about it. It forces them to talk about it, or if they're not working with an advisor, it might literally be a decade before they ever say, hey, how are we going to buy that house we both want? Or how are we going to pay for our kids' college? It forces them to have a conversation. I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Cool. So before we start recording, we're talking about what we might go over today. And one of the things that I think that you talk a lot about with your clients is making a plan sustainable. So what I mean is from a budgeting standpoint or a saving standpoint, I think a lot of people, they run at the finances, right? Maybe it's a New Year's resolution. They're all jacked up. They're excited. They want to save more money. This is the year. Everything's going to be different. So they go from saving maybe $0 a month to they want to save $1,000 a month. So they go 0 to 60. And then what happens with their New Year's resolutions, by the time we get into February, it's blown up, it's over, and they're back to the exact same habits they had before. So you and I agree that part of the goal should be building a sustainable plan that might be making goals that are small enough to achieve and start to feel good about it. But in your opinion, I hope I didn't talk too much, but what are some things that go into that sustainable plan?
No, everything you hit on was very important. Thank you for
I stole your thunder.
No, that not at all. It's making a plan that, like we talked about, is sustainable. Because and I want to say I'm going back to the beginning because I want to make it clear for everybody, because I know some people probably maybe do what I do, but there's some people starting out. So one of the biggest mistakes I did when I was starting out, I want to share my mistakes, is I was focusing on trying to show that, hey, if we do this, we can save all this money. We can save all this money. And I started realizing that's not the point of this. The point of this is to get to the goal. That's the point. It's not to try to save as much money as soon as possible. The goal is to set up a plan that you can do for years, maybe months, maybe years, but be sustainable. And I realized maybe we can save $1,000, but we save $700 and we can do that over the next few years. That's way better than trying to do 1,000 and the person stops. The goal should be try to keep the person in some type of budget or some type of system that makes them have progress. And I started focusing on more about progression than perfection, because the progression will get you to where you want to get.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing with a lot of 401k plans now will offer like an automatic increase, right? So we get the question all the time from somebody who starts a new job and they say, "Hey, Alex, how much should I be saving in my 401k?" And I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but like you pick a number that you're comfortable with. Maybe it's only 5%, but then set up the option so that come next January, it can go from 5% to 6%. Then it'll go from 6 to 7. And by doing that, you're incrementally increasing and you're getting to the point where you're making that progress consistently. And if you're chasing perfection, like I could sit here and say, based on all the numbers in your financial situation, you should be saving 20% of your paycheck in your 401k. But like if you can't afford to do that, that's just bad advice. It doesn't help anybody. So let's start with where you're comfortable and get an increase. So I couldn't agree more. I think I'm just reiterating what you're saying, but I love it.
I like it because when people have that mindset, I think it's good because then it reinforces that our goal is trying to help the person. It's not about the numbers, it's about actually trying to help the people.
Yeah, I think you and I had talked the last time we spoke about some comparisons to either health goals or financial goals. And the example I like to use is like working out. If you're somebody that never works out, you haven't worked out in decades, your doctor says, "Hey, you better start doing that. You're gonna have some problems." So you say, "Okay, I'm gonna go work out." And you put together a plan. You say, "I'm gonna wake up at 4 a.m. every morning, go to the gym, and work out for 2 hours. I'm gonna lift heavy weights. I'm gonna run 5 miles." You're not going to do that. You're going to do that one day. The next day, you're not going to be able to wake up or move. And then you're not going to work out for 3 weeks. The right plan is to incrementally increase your activity and get to where you want to go. Same is true on the financial end. If you're somebody that's never saved money, never invested, struggled with a budget, make a small change first, get in the habit of that. And then maybe 6 months later, make another small change. You're not going 0 to 60. It's not going to work.
No, absolutely. And like, to go along that is, with the budget, back to the budgeting kind of, I was like, let's cut out, like, kind of look at that. Let's cut out things you don't really care about. Is even with the budgeting, I'm like, hey, you might stop at the gas station every day to get something, but you don't really care about that gas station food, but you love restaurants. You like going to restaurants once or twice a month. Let's cut out that gas station snacks and let's focus on just keeping that restaurant once or twice a month, but we're still saving a bunch of money.
Yeah, and then by doing that, you're making the goal. The goal isn't to save money. Very few people are motivated by just saving money. Some people are, but most people aren't. Now they can be motivated by, if I follow this budget, now I can continue to go to that restaurant I want to go to, or maybe I can even go out to a nicer restaurant or go more often, whatever the thing is. Exactly. And now the goal is enjoying something you want to do, not saving money.
Exactly.
So I think that's cool. What other approaches do you take with that? Am I missing anything, or is that sort of the approach to the sustainable plan?
Yeah, that's pretty much the approach. The approach is trying to find, like I said, sustainable, but like I said, cutting out the things they don't really care about and keep the things they do. But when the numbers work out, we're saving more money.
Okay.
Like, I try to really focus on that, because as long as people keep the things they really enjoy, and then we cut out maybe probably 70 to 80% of the stuff they don't care about, and they keep that small amount, it does make it more sustainable. And then people have different values. I work with couples, they really want to do stuff for the kids. So we'll keep stuff for the kids. Maybe cut out some stuff that they do, but we'll keep the stuff for the kids because they really want the kids. They can't imagine cutting any of that stuff out, but they want to make sacrifices maybe in some of the things they do to have it for the kids. Everybody varies, but it's like, hey, we want to do something that works for you, that you're happy about, that you keep going. That's the goal while still making progress.
Great. Yeah, I think that's awesome. So let's change gears a little bit. We're going to get to student loans eventually, which is probably one of my least favorite topics in financial planning, but just like debt in general. So I think when you look at people that have debt, it can be, I don't have to name all the categories, but there's student loans you run into all the time. People get into credit card trouble. People have mortgages. There's all kinds of different things you borrow money for. And I like to categorize things into sort of two broad categories as good debt and bad debt. Simply speaking, good debt is generally a low interest rate. It's hopefully something that's helping you grow as a professional. So maybe that is going to college. And then bad debt is those high interest rate things. It's the credit cards that have just snowballed over time. I don't think we talked about this last time we talked, but that's how I approach it. Do you break it down similarly, or how do you look at debt?
Yeah, I look at it pretty similar to what you just described. Is I do good debt, bad debt. And what I mean by that is like sometimes, depending on people's situation, we might organize a little bit differently, right? You might organize credit cards differently than you organize in the student loans. It may be because of interest rate and things may be paused for a while, zero balance on the credit cards. I might wait 12 months on credit card, focus on some other things. So it could vary depending on the person's situation. But yeah, there's definitely debts that you jumps out to you like, okay, hold on, let me get some more information about that debt first to try to develop a strategy for that individual.
Yeah. So I guess let's tackle student loans first, just so we get that out of the way and move on with our life. So we get the question. Sometimes it's like our clients' adult children, they're just graduating college and they've got X amount of dollars in student loans. They want to know, should I pay the minimum? Should I try to pay them off as fast as possible? What's the move? And it's really hard to give advice on that because there's so many factors. We have, there's always this idea floating out there in the political world of what if they get forgiven? We have relatively low interest rates and the tax or the interest paid is tax deductible. So there's a benefit there. And then there's just the opportunity cost of if I'm paying extra on my student loans, that means I can't contribute to maybe this retirement account. Maybe I can't save to buy a house. So what is your jumping off point with student loans? When someone says, hey, what should I do with these things? Where do you start?
I get information about the student loans, like the interest, how much is on there, how long they have to go. I get all that basic information. But I also have to deal with a lot of stuff that's been happening over the last few years about, hey, whether they get forgiven, stuff going on about forgiveness for the loans and new ideas constantly popping up or save plans. There's a lot of things going on. For me, sometimes a lot of these plans I have to refer to my network because I have people who in my network, which is always great to have a network of people. I have people specialized in student loans. I reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? What's this type of move for this situation? But there are people who are like, hey, I feel like student loans is going to be forgiven. It's going to be forgiven. That's always tough because in my mind, sometimes I'm like, let's go ahead and try to work this to pay this off. But for that, if a person is believing or holding to the idea that they may be forgiven, I tell them, hey, listen, go ahead and make your student loan payment, and whatever you're going to put on extra to pay it off, let's put that to a high yield savings account. And because right now that helps with inflation, kind of keeps up with inflation. But at least if you feel like later on, hey, that plan is not going to happen, you have that money, go ahead and pay off your student loans. And if it does happen, you got the money to go towards something else. But I think that still should be like, hey, this may not happen. If it does, great. And then try to make a plan for it.
Do you have a gut feeling with that? I'm putting you on the spot right now, but student loan forgiveness, do you think it will happen in a broad sweeping way? Or do you think right now we see certain niche professions. If you're a teacher, there's a loan forgiveness program. If you work in a nonprofit, there's a couple things you can apply for. Do you think at any point they're just going to take out an eraser?
I personally don't think so. Unfortunately, and this is for people, it's getting really political. And there's some things that the Supreme Court's finding that they just can't do to pay off student loans. I think the best that probably would ever happen is that if you make your payments and document it for over 20 years, they may be forgiven. I think that's the best, me personally, and I could be wrong, this is just my opinion. I think that's probably the best that'll ever happen, but I don't think they'll ever come around and just say, hey, it's gone.
Yeah, I never want to get political, especially on the podcast. And it's just it's frustrating because I think you have some people promising things that they can't actually follow through on, and they're getting the cynic in me thinks maybe that's a good way to get votes and nothing else. But
neither. But I agree with you completely. I think sometimes it's promises to get votes, and I think it just hurts the everyday person at the end of the day. And I think that people do need help. I think we need to do a better job of educating young people and parents on student loans and their options and the prospects for income, depending on the degree that they're trying to get. We just need to do better with education, making good decisions, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I don't know who that responsibility falls on. Is it the high school guidance counselor? Is it mom and dad? Do you have those conversations with people that have kids going to school? Like, how do you educate a 17-year-old on what it means to have $100,000 of student loan debt and a starting salary of $40,000? Like, how do you have that conversation?
It's tough. I'm not going to be completely honest. It's always tough having those conversations because every time you have those conversations, there's emotions. And it's always going to come back to that because you can sit here and talk about the numbers, but when somebody wants to go out of state because they really like a school and they want to be a part of that football program and have those colors on their chest, those emotional conversations, or a parent really want to see their child go to a specific school and have that, it's really hard to have those conversations. I try to just educate and say, and degrees change. One of the things I think a lot of us dealt with going to college is degrees change, right? Your major you go in thinking you're going to do, it may change later on. So that's always a factor. But I try to tell students is whatever you think you're going to get your salary, and try to be realistic about it. Don't do the top end. If you're like the top 1% or whatever in your profession, do more of the average or the median salary, or maybe even beginner salary. Be realistic, and whatever that's going to be, let's say that's 40,000. I wouldn't take out more than that for a first year salary, so that way you make sure you're able to pay it off. That's general. I would avoid at all costs any debt, but if you're going to do it, have some type of guidelines for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I don't know the way like I was raised, my parents taught growing up, like the expectation was always like you're going to go to college and get a good job. That's how you got that good job. That's how you had a good life, is you had to go to college first. That was step one. And now I think the mindset is shifting a little bit where people are just seeing the cost associated with it and realize there's other paths you can take to having a reasonable income and a good job and all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't, unless you have to, I think to go to school, there's things, right, that you have to go to school for. Yeah, lawyer, doctor, maybe engineer. And in a lot of these places, a lot of these professions do make good salaries, but sometimes it's not a bad idea to go ahead and get some work experience, figure out what you want to do. It's hard for me to see somebody going to school and they just spend a ton of money going to university and they don't know what they want to do, and then they end up leaving. Sometimes it's a good idea to figure out what you want to do first.
I'm not that old, but it's changed so much since I was making that decision that there's so much information that's readily available for free.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can go on YouTube and learn how to do almost anything. And that's not to say that nobody needs to go to college. If I need heart surgery, I want the surgeon to have gone to college, not just watch a YouTube video.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can learn a lot out of them.
I agree.
I think that's a good point. Let's put student loans to bed. Unless you got anything else you want to add.
No, that's good. That was good.
All right, because we could probably talk about student loans for hours, and people don't.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk debt payoff strategies. So I know you have the snowball and a couple other different strategies people can use to get out of debt. Do you want to talk about just the options they have and what makes sense for different people's situations?
Yeah, I could talk about that. But typically, like I said, I do start with the snowball method or avalanche. Most of the people I work with, the snowball tends to work better. Just most people want to see progress, and that's good for seeing progress. There are people who are more like have an analytical type mind and want to see the interest rates down, and they're really focused on that. And I try to like match it depending on the personality, and that takes a little bit to try to understand. But I think this is where personal finance professionals or people who do it comes into play, because when I work with people, that they're always wondering, hey, what's this? Sometimes I look for a magic pill or something magical to happen, but this is where we come into play, is that we're able to look at a whole situation, get all the information, whether it's the money being saved or money coming from different places, or we're able to see the whole picture and then develop a strategy that's more personalized for the person. And there's oftentimes the everyday person will miss those strategies, where we can see those strategies and apply it to them. So that's the biggest thing, is like gathering information and then rearranging things that makes it more efficient, optimal for the individual.
So the avalanche would appeal to like the spreadsheet person, and the snowball would appeal to maybe everybody else. Why don't I take a step back though? Let's define what those two strategies are for people.
Yep, absolutely. So the snowball method is when you're focusing on the lowest amount first. Regardless of the interest rate, you focus on the lowest amount first. So whatever your lowest debt is, you focus on that, and then you'll tackle that. The avalanche focuses more on the interest rate. Whatever the highest interest rate is, regardless of the amount, you tackle that first. So one's the amount, the balance snowball is about the lowest amount in balance, and then the avalanche is focused on the highest interest rate, regardless of the balance amount.
Okay. And usually what I see people do is, let's say you have two loans, one's $100 a month, one's $500 a month. Once you pay off that $100 per month payment, take that $100 and you apply it to the next one. So that's where the snowball name comes in, because as you pay off more, you're making larger payments and making faster progress. And I think it's, like we said before, the spreadsheet method. My mind as a financial advisor says the avalanche makes way more sense. Pay off the higher debt as quick as you can, and then move on to the lower debt one next. But I found the same thing that you have. A lot of people, depending on their thinking, it's a lot easier of a goal, and it's a lot more approachable if they say, I'm going to pay off that lower amount first. I can wrap my head around that. And then once I do that, they move on to the next one. And the fact is, like, either of them are going to work. They're both going to get you where you want to go. Could I make an argument that the avalanche is more efficient? Sure. But if you're not going to actually do it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And that, like I said, one of the recurring things that I'm going to have is progression over perfection. Like, it's more important that we get the debts out of the way than try to do the most efficient way as possible, which avalanche would be. Also, I'm a nerd as well. Sometimes I like looking at the numbers, and I'll have on my spreadsheet. I'll tell me which one will be the quickest way to do, and it's always going to be avalanche. But sometimes, like when I weighed out which method be faster, the snowball method, the avalanche. Sometimes it's a matter of a few months. So I'm like, if it's a matter of a few months, it really doesn't matter. But sometimes it's big. Sometimes it's 7, 8 months, depending on how much debt and the interest rate and so on and so forth. But avalanche tends to be the fastest method also to get out of debt.
I think it's depending on the numbers, right? Like somebody might have $300,000 in student loans, but they've got another loan that's only $10,000. So for that person, even if the interest is higher on the $300,000 loan, it is such a big hurdle to pay off $300,000 of debt. So if they can knock out the $10,000 first, more power to them, and it's one less payment. So it can make sense that way.
Yep, that's exactly. I look at that as well to try to factor that in, and I think that's something that we do as personal finance professionals, is we're trying to figure out the best way to tackle it for that individual and keep them on that path.
Cool. All right, Tyrone, we're getting to the end of our time, and I want to make sure we cover everything we set out to. Is there anything else that you think people need to know about you, what you do, or financial planning in general?
I think a little bit about what I do and what I try to focus on that's important is financial health. I think right now we got into a place now, let's talk about physical health, and we talk about physical and mental health, right? We're in a place where we talk about that. Those are important, right? Work-life balance. I think with finance for a long time, we talk about financial health. We only talk about the numbers versus the expenses, and that was it. Hey, how are we doing in that regard? But we need to also be focusing on the emotional side of it as well. We need to focus on what is my relationship with money? How have I grown up with money? How does money affect me? When I have debts, how is that impacting my sleep, my daily life? Is it stressing me out? When I'm working with my spouse, who I'm with, when we're talking about money, are we having healthy conversations? Do we need help with that? Do we need to seek a financial therapist or a therapist to communicate around money? Going back to some of the money problems that Nate talked about probably in the podcast, is that sometimes it's a communication issue, and it just shows up a lot of money because money is very important in our society, but sometimes it's a communication thing. So do I need help with communication? But these type of things that the emotional health around money is just as important as the numbers.
Love that. Thank you for coming on. You've been an awesome guest. I think this will be one of our most listened to episodes because you're that good. So if someone's listening to this right now and they want to know more about you, Tyrone, where can they go? Where can they find more information?
Yeah, so I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn, type right in Tyrone White Jr. You can find me on LinkedIn. Also, TyroneWhiteJr.com. I have a website. You can reach out to me there. Those are two places that if you want to reach out to me, you can contact me. Those would be the best places to do it.
All right, cool. Awesome. Thank you for doing this. This has been the Roadmap to Retirement podcast, and we're going to cut it off there. Thanks.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Alexander Neri. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Alexander Neri or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Alexander Neri and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.